So I'd like to welcome you. We do have a candle right behind me, and I want to go ahead and start by lighting our candle this morning. Here's our light. And there's our flame. I pray that this will be a very productive time for you spiritually as well as intellectually, and I'll do my best to make that happen. I was thinking this morning about a course I took when I was, I think, 18 years old. That was a lifetime away. I didn't know it at the time, but that was a long time ago. I took the Evelyn Woods speed reading course, and I tripled, quadrupled my reading speed, and it was very helpful for school. Um, the thing that I was thinking about this morning was not the technique of speed reading so much, but a couple of other hints that they gave us along the way. One was they kept telling us, when you read something, if you read the first sentence of a paragraph, you have a pretty good idea what the paragraph's going to say. And if you just wanted to quickly review something, you could do it that way. The other thing that they taught me, and I'll just use this book here, was very helpful. They said, let's say you were going to read a brand new book. You've never read it before. Take it, open it up, make it so it's not so tight on the spine. And then they said, here's what you do. Get an introduction to this book. So you would flip over a few pages, just kind of glance at it, keep flipping and see what it says. Like for here, biblical meaning, formation of the canon, God's character, and just see what it says. Just as you go through it, forgiveness and human relations, and just see what words they're using in the book. And as you take about a minute, maybe 2 minutes to flip through the book, you can get a short, very brief introduction to what this book may be about. I found it to be rather helpful at times, and I got to thinking that's what we're doing here this morning, just giving you an introduction. There's so much. If you go to the library, there's shelves and shelves of books on the New Testament. I'm not interested, nor could I, not qualified to give you a very in-depth look at every nuance of the New Testament. But I think that together we can grasp a short introduction. And that's what I want to give you this morning, is that overarching sense of what this is. We call it the Word of God. We call it our foundation, our scripture. It's where we learn about Jesus's life and the expansion of the church. We learn a lot in that, but we got to start at the beginning, okay? And at the beginning, I'd like to say that in the New Testament, there are 27 books, and they were written by at least 12 authors. That's what we hold in our hands when we pick up the Bible and turn to the New Testament. I want to give you a very clear look at what is included in the New Testament. This is one of those overarching quick looks that if we just kind of flip through our book, we might see. There are, as I said, 27 books, but they are not listed chronologically, okay? They don't start with Paul's letter and Paul's letters and then go to the Gospels and so on. It's not chronological. What it is that it is put together in sections. You all know that the first section of the New Testament includes the 4 Gospels. Go ahead and just say it out loud if you know what the 4 Gospels are. Go ahead and everybody say it at once. Go ahead. Matthew, Mark,
John.
Luke, and John. Those are our 4 Gospels. The second section is there is, excuse me, one book. It's called the Acts of the Apostles, often simply referred to as just Acts. Then there is the third section, which are 21 epistles. What the heck is an epistle? You may have seen that term, you may have heard it. Epistles, I don't know why we come up with these words at all, but it's a church word, I guess. Well, maybe not just church word, but it's a word that simply means letters, okay? Don't get thrown by the fancy term epistles. It simply means letters. We've come to know that these are letters of Paul, 13 letters of Paul, and that there are other letters included. And then the fourth section is that one we're all always kind of interested in, the apocalypse, or what we call Revelation. Just think about that term and take a look at that word on the screen, revelation of Jesus. Now, as we said, really important to understand this secret. These 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are not pure biographies. Well, you say, well, now, wait a minute, Jim. I just got done reading the Gospel of Mark the other day, and it was just a description of Jesus and his ministry. It was seemed pretty straightforward to me, and I have looked at the Gospel of Matthew, and Matthew seemed pretty straightforward to these things as well. They are not pure biographies. They are gospels. What I'm trying to say is that gospels are good news accounts. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all wrote their gospels to present to the readers the good news about Jesus. So they wrote their accounts to help us understand the life and ministry of Jesus and the purposes of his life. So I hope you understand that nuance. They have an agenda to set forth. What do I mean? Matthew's agenda was to set forth the gospel of Jesus to show that he is the coming Messiah that Jews had waited for. That's very different than the Gospel of Mark, which is one that was written for every man, every woman. Different from the Gospel of Luke, who was written to show that Jesus was for the oppressed and for the outcast. It's just an agenda that they want to set forth. All of the accounts in Jesus's life are mentioned in every gospel. His teaching, for example, his ministry, his miracles, his death and resurrection. In the first 3 gospels, they are referenced or called synoptic gospels. Maybe you've seen this term. I want you to know what it means. It simply refers to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, not John. John is very, very different gospel. If you set Matthew, Mark, and Luke side by side, you would discover something very peculiar. You would notice that they tell the same stories in the same sequence, often using the very same words. That's why they're called synoptic gospels, from the Greek soon, which means with. Optic comes from the verb opteo, to see with the same eyes. I'll give you another example. 90%, just think about this. Think about the Gospel of Mark. 90% word for word of the Gospel of Mark is found in Matthew. And about 50% of Mark is found in Luke. There's something called the parallel gospels that those of us who have been through school understand, where you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and sometimes John put side by side. And you can see how the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, tell exactly the same stories, or use Mark as their basis. Scholars believe literally they had the Gospel of Mark right in front of them as they wrote, as Matthew and Luke wrote their own Gospels. And they added things and they may have taken away, but you can see that it is exactly the same story, just told with a different bit of agenda. But I want to say that the storyline is the same. Jesus came from Galilee. He gathered disciples around himself. He taught. He performed miracles. There was jealousy by the religious leaders in the synagogue. He was betrayed. He was arrested. Jesus was crucified. He was buried. He was resurrected. He appeared to others, and then he ascended to heaven. These storylines are in the Gospels. That second section of our four, Gospels, the book of Acts, epistles, letters, and the Apocalypse. The second section is the book of Acts. Now, if you were reading some books about the book of Acts, you may often see it referred to as Luke Acts. Luke Acts is used because scholars believe that the author of the Gospel of Luke also then continued the story telling about the spread of Christianity, and Luke wrote Acts as well. So it's often simply referred to as Luke Acts. Does that make sense? Luke wrote Acts. And so Luke wrote about the story of Jesus's life and ministry. But then he continued in a separate book to tell about the spread of Christianity. You know, friends, that in the book of Acts, there are two main characters. One is, I'll say, Peter. Can somebody tell me who the other one is? Don't be shy.
Paul.
Exactly. Paul and Peter are prominent in the spread of the early church. Let me cut to the chase and tell you that Peter became the missionary to the Jews, and Christianity spread primarily in the first couple of centuries through the Jewish faith. It was considered a religion for the Jews. But there was this other wild character named Paul. And Paul took the gospel, the good news, to the non-Jews. Non-Jews are referred to as Gentiles. That's what Gentiles means. Simply those people that are not Jewish. So Peter took the gospel of Jesus to the Jews, and Paul took it to the Gentiles, the non-Jews, and the church began to spread from there. Paul, as you know, wrote 13 of those epistles, right? And epistles simply means letters, those letters of the New Testament. 21 letters are written. Some are big and some are very small. In Paul's 13 letters, you may notice that he starts with Romans, which is the largest of those letters, and goes to the shortest letter. I don't want to confuse you with too much of this because I really want to give you that big sense. These letters, as I said earlier, were not gospels. They were not necessarily about how the gospel spread throughout the land. It's not even a revelation, but what it is were letters that were addressed either to churches. All right, so Paul wrote letters to 4 churches, and then he wrote to the epistles were addressed to 4 churches, and now let me think. I got to think about this. I want to make sure I get this right for you. 9 churches, letters were addressed to 9 churches and 12 individuals. These were generally about problems that they were having, like Corinthians. Churches were having problems and dissension was being created in the churches. Paul tried to act as one who would clean that up for them. 2 kinds of epistles, right? There are the Pauline epistles, and there are what are referred to as Catholic epistles. Catholic epistles or Catholic letters are not Roman Catholic letters. Catholic is used here in that broad understanding of the word as general, broad letters, general letters. So there were 13 letters that Paul wrote and 8 non-Pauline letters that were general letters that addressed very broad issues in the church. Okay, so where are we? Gospels discuss the beginnings of Christianity. The second section, the book of Acts, talks about its spread, and the epistles discuss the ethics and beliefs and problems that were in the early church. That fourth section called the Apocalypse or Revelation. Okay? Boy, you want to see everybody's eyes glaze over? Here would be a good place. The Revelation is the most mysterious and puzzling book of the New Testament. It describes a set of visions that John has about the heavenly realm and the future course of history. It is not, I know you all have studied Revelation before, and I'm sure that Mark would have taught you that it is not about John Kennedy, and it's not about Russia and these kinds of things. What it was a book that was written to encourage the early Christians who were undergoing great persecution. And essentially, there is a big overarching theme that is to be understood, that it is God who is in control, and that ultimately it is God who will prevail, and there will be peace on earth, something very different from what we have known. Now, I know, and I used to read these books left and right. The one famous book, let's see, that I used to read in college was called The Late Great Planet Earth. Now, who wrote that? Hal Lindsey wrote The Late Great Planet Earth. And this was about trying to understand all the nuances and the ways in which this should be understood contemporarily. Really not the case. I want to give you a moment to chime in. So let me just talk about this last section. I simply call it anticipation and fulfillment. You'll remember when Larry gave us this insight the other day, last week, and he said the Old Testament is full of innuendo and signs and stories that really point forward to Jesus. And I said, okay, class dismissed. He was absolutely right. Um, and that is the theme of the Old Testament, right? There is this great anticipation for the coming Messiah. And the anticipation um, is conveyed often in these covenants. What we see is that the Old Testament is about the anticipation of what is fulfilled in Jesus. Jesus is the Messiah that has been awaited, and in Him, in this Messiah, we can finally have that relationship with God and the life that God intended for us from the very beginning of time. If you even go back to that early story of Adam and Eve and God creating us for a fulfilled life with Him, and the sin that entered and the East of Eden separation from God, with Jesus, as Larry said, since the beginning of time, we have the fulfillment that we have all waited for. And I was thinking last night that perhaps that is the greatest secret of all, that God keeps His promises to us. Does everybody have glazed over eyes? I know we did this so quickly. I'm feeling pressure on the backside because it's 9:34, and I know that the 10 o'clock people are going to start flooding this narthex, and I don't want them to interfere with our time. But I want to back off now because I didn't want this to be so much of a lecture. What are the thoughts you guys have about the New Testament? Thoughts, reactions, questions, anything that comes to mind about the New Testament. I want you to have time to address that. I know I laid so much on you. Yes, Larry. Unmute him, please.
I requested him to unmute.
Larry.
Actually, you did that to me.
Okay. Larry, can you unmute your microphone? Thank you. Thank you very much. Go right ahead.
Reinforce what you said about
Okay.
the Old Testament through numerous messianic promises concerning the Messiah, found their fulfillment in the New Testament.
Right.
where sometimes the writers even said, in referring back, Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Ephratah, as the Old Testament scriptures say. Or in the book of Matthew, he often quoted the Old Testament
Oh,
where
he
it was
did.
prophesied he would be wounded for our transgression, bruised for our iniquities.
Iniquities, right.
Or Job even made reference to the resurrection. So I see the two going hand in hand very much, with the emphasis in the New Testament on the life and ministry of Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world.
Thank you, Larry. Again, I think you put it very well, that Jesus is the fulfillment of this long-awaited promise that God has fulfilled now. Others? When you think of the New Testament, what comes to mind? Larry?
Well, it's the part of Scripture that we hear 2,000 years later. It kind of comprises the basic parts of our Sunday worship. It's as if the book was, these books, this part of the Bible was just written a week or two ago. But we think of it as a very live and energetic part of our faith. It's what my faith is based on.
Okay.
Why I'm
So
listening in this morning.
Okay, so we have an agreement. You'll teach the next Bible study.
I didn't say that.
I read it between the lines. Well, I like the way you put that, energetic. This word, written word, that points us to the human word of Jesus. That is alive and energetic. I think that's well said. Sheila, were you going to say something?
I was just telling you that Ed has his hand up. I don't know if you're still in speaker view, but Ed's ready to speak.
Thank you. I will check in. Okay.
He's unmuted.
Ed.
Are you unmuted?
He is.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I had technical difficulties getting in, as I guess you guys had technical difficulties getting started.
Oh, we did.
All right. I have a couple of questions. We have some very, very close friends. And they said, we're going on a trip to Greece. And the title of the trip is called Following in the Footsteps of Paul.
Ooh.
And so my wife and I went on that. We thought that was sort of a message to us.
Yeah.
And we enjoyed that. Two members of their pastoral team went on the trip with us. This church is a congregational church from Western Springs, Illinois, which we lived there for 42 years. So we were, anyways, I was very impressed with that minister. I guess I was only to the church once, but that wasn't just to hear our friend do a solo at the church. But anyways, the pastor made a couple of statements. He said, one, that there were, in all likelihood, many more than 12 disciples. There were 12, probably, I don't know, I might be using the wrong term, superior disciples or whatever. But he said that there were 12, that Mark was one of them, and that Mark was the brother of Jesus. Now, he didn't know how many, and nor does, at least to my understanding, the Bible address how many were in the following, but it was probably more than 12 in his opinion.
You know, that doesn't surprise me. I mean, think about the number 12, and then think about the parallel with the 12 tribes of Israel.
Yeah, it's a Jewish thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You can find the brothers. Let's just say siblings. You can find the siblings in the Gospel of Matthew and Luke, and they're mentioned by name.
Okay.
Mark is not one of them.
I
Mark's
think
not
he has
one of
other
them.
I think he has other brothers and sisters that aren't mentioned.
That's true, Sheila. That's right.
I think Mark might be a half brother that came on,
Okay.
came along. Mary had supposedly 12 kids, and then her husband dies, and then she remarries, and then has a few more kids, and so I think Mark is in part of that second batch.
Thank you.
Ed,
Ed, you had a second point to make.
I did.
I'm sorry for pushing you. I see people are gathering outside. We've got just a few minutes. So
okay, I'll be brief.
yeah.
The second comment that this minister had a lot of really interesting insights, and he appeared to be very, very well read. And his second insight was that Paul has been attributed with writing many books of the New Testament.
Mhm.
He does not believe that Paul wrote all those. He believes that Paul wrote some of them. And he said chronologically, while things were talked about verbally, that the transcription of many of the Gospels and other things in the New Testament really didn't find their way to paper for maybe up to 100 years or longer.
Mhm.
And that obviously passing things down by word of mouth is not always the most accurate way to do things. Is that your experiences also?
It is my belief, and I think the belief of most scholars, that Paul did not write the entire 13 books ascribed to him. There are, I want to think, I think Colossians might have been one that's attributed to Paul, but there are some books that people believe he did not write because the writing style is just so different. So I definitely agree with that. Writing down, I don't know. We typically think of Paul, well, Paul's letters were the first New Testament books we have. By the way, Second Peter is considered the last book written, about 120. Paul's letters began, we think, around 50 to 65 AD. And
Well, Pastor, remember when you told us about those run-on sentences?
Yeah.
Was that in part Mark's era, or was that prior?
Yeah.
Or was that prior?
No, those run-on sentences. That's how the Koine Greek was written. That's
So
how it was written.
I think that they're more likely to be misinterpreted than the word of mouth.
Yeah,
Ah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm so glad you're thinking about that.
yeah, yeah.
Okay,
I've been thinking
okay.
about that for a long time.
Yeah. Well, Ed, it's a good question. I would love to hear him speak about that more. Everything gets sort of talked about before it gets written down, but I think it's always been my understanding, let me just say it that way, right or wrong, that Paul wrote these letters and sent them out through essentially what would be the postal service of the time to these churches and individuals. So friends,
Okay.
I want to do one more thing. As interim minister, I try to do different things. And just to give you a look at different ways of going about things. Next week, I want to talk with you not about the Old Testament or New Testament, but I want to talk with you about what is often referred to as God's problem, or what I consider one of the great problems in the church, that without an adequate understanding or response to this problem of suffering, just so many people feel hurt and betrayed and often leave the church. It's also something that people who are not in the church have a hard time with. So I think it's the big elephant in the room. And I really would like to talk with you about the problem of suffering. There is not one response in the Bible, there are several responses to the problem of suffering. I want to present those to you, have a discussion with you, which ones make sense, which ones don't, and see if we can come to an understanding that feels both credible and meaningful to us, because we're all faced with it sometime or other in our lives. The week after that, I'm going to suggest that we do a book study, and this is the book. And I want to tell you about it today in case you want to go online and order it. And you can go on some used book sites and you can find this for maybe half price. This book is entitled Speaking Christian. Speaking Christian. And it is written by a man named Marcus Borg, B-O-R-G. He has written a number of books. I have read most of them, and there are others of his books that I would so highly recommend. But this is the one I'd like us to read. Speaking Christian is about all of the kinds of language we use in the church without always understanding the history and the proper use of that language. For example, salvation. What do we mean by salvation? It's often used in a way today that really had no true reference to its first usages in the Bible. What do we mean by believing or faith or sin or righteousness, of born again, of Jesus as the only way? This book is full of all kinds of language and words that you and I could have a fabulous discussion about. And we'll read this together. I'd like for you to go get a copy of Speaking Christian by Marcus Borg. We'll post this on the website, and I'll provide other ways to remind you of this. I really think that we would have lively, fun discussions about this and really have some great insight. So if you'd like to be a part of that, go out and get one of the copies of that sent to you from Amazon or wherever, and we'll go from there. I'm tired. I'm just worn out. And I worry that I've thrown too much at you today. I really don't want to lecture. I really want to have more discussions with you. And I think we're going to shift from this point forward from all of this information about the Old Testament and New Testament to the problem of suffering. And we'll have some discussion and we'll do our book study. And then after the book study, we're going to pick a book of the Bible. And we're going to all have input into which book that is. And we're going to study a book of the Bible. As the interim, I want to give us a look at various types of Bible studies. Oh, friends, the hordes are at the door.
Yeah, I know they are.
I want to say thank you and encourage us all to keep our eyes on the light that is the light of the world for us, that guides us, that illuminates our steps, that makes life meaningful as people of faith and as people who are informed. So I'll see you next time, but hopefully see you Sunday. May God bless you. I'll see you soon.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Bye.